Hi, I'm William Stewart, co-founder of Teleios. Welcome back to our verse-by-verse study on the book of Mark. We come to a very exciting and profound section of Mark, the Olivet Discourse. This is Christ speaking to the disciples about the end times, and it comes from them questioning Christ's statement over the temple will be torn down, probably occurred at 70 AD by the Romans in the first great Jewish revolt. So they asked him further in verse 3. He sat upon the Mount of Olives. Remember, the Mount of Olives has special places from where Christ will ascend and he will descend when he comes again. Zechariah 14. So over against the temple faces the Mount of Olives, all on the east side of Jerusalem. Mount of Olives is just a slightly outside of town. Peter, James, and John, and Andrew asked him privately, when shall these things shall be? What are the sign at the end of the times? Good questions and appropriate questions about what's going to happen in the future. Christ says, take heed that any man deceive you. So this is the first thing that he mentions. Now I need to put the Olivet Discourse in context. It's also discussed in Matthew 24 and 25 and Luke 23. The Olivet Discourse talks about primarily the 7-year tribulation and the coming of Christ. And the 7-year tribulation starts just after the rapture, when Christ comes again for his church and takes them away. We don't know when that rapture is going to occur. It's described in 1 Corinthians 15. So again, you have to put all these pieces in Scripture together. And also at the end of 1 Thessalonians 4, a couple of the verses that allude to it. But these are, I think, the two best passages. So after the rapture is when we see this Olivet Discourse occurring in a 7-year period leading up to the coming of Christ again. Now, the Olivet Discourse, I think, takes a particularly Jewish bent in what it's discussing. And the book of Revelation, the time of the tribulation is discussed between chapter 4 and chapter 18, and then the return of Christ. That takes more of a worldwide view from my own viewpoint. So these sections have different information, even between the Gospels generally and the book of Revelation. They all add information. So the first thing he mentions is there's going to be deceit. There's going to be the Antichrist, his prophet, and there'll be other people who say, as he says, they will come in my name, deceive many. And he's saying, don't believe them. But it goes beyond that. Now, also, I will say that there's differences in how people interpret these passages. I'm taking, again, what I think is a normal literal view. There's symbolism in prophecy, but they represent actual events. And some people think that this is the time leading up to the rapture. I don't think that's true because, again, we don't know when the rapture occurs. God doesn't tell us, nor Christ. Verse 8, well, wars and rumors of wars, a famous line. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, earthquakes, famines and troubles, and the beginnings of sorrow. It's the beginning of sorrow because what he's discussing here is really the first half of the tribulation leading up to the abomination of desolation at the midpoint, where the Antichrist desolates the temple in Jerusalem. And things get worse after that. That's called the Great Tribulation, lasts 3.5 years, sometimes versus just the tribulation in the first 3.5. So it's the beginning of sorrows. Verse 9, take heed for yourselves. They shall deliver you to the councils, the synagogues, and you'll be beaten and brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them. Otherwise, they're in sin and going against God. The gospel must be first published among all nations. So at this time, the gospel will go forward to everybody, but they'll deliver you up. Verse 11, when they do so, don't take any thought beforehand what you'll speak. Otherwise, the Spirit will help you. Now, this is a little bit like the prophets in the Old Testament. We don't know. There's no indication that believers in the tribulation period, that the Spirit's been taken out of the way, they, I don't think, are indwelt by the Spirit or regenerated. So like the prophets of the Old Testament, these people testifying for Christ and God will have special power by the Spirit at some level. Brother will betray brother unto death, and father, son, and Christ, and children will rise up against their parents and will cause them to be put to death. You'll be hated by all men for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end will be saved. So again, it's up to the person to maintain their faith and do what the verses to those in the tribulation say to do. But of course, remember, Christ chooses, or God chooses, and brings to faith those people who he wants. So even though they have to maintain their faith, who God chooses, also they are kept. So we have to remember that as well. But they're told basically to maintain. And this will be to the end of the tribulation when Christ comes again, and those people who are left and faithful will enter into his kingdom. Okay, now this is the first half of the tribulation, first 3.5 years, up until the Antichrist begins to reign. It roughly corresponds to the bowl judgments in the book of Revelation 6, 7 and 8, roughly. And the last bowl, the seal judgments. The seal judgments, the last one is open, I think, at 8:1, Revelation 8:1. So what have we learned today? The disciples, 4 of them, Peter, John, Andrew, and James, want to know about the end times. And Christ begins to tell them about the end times. There'll be wars, rumors of war. There'll be phenomena in the skies. There'll be famine. There'll actually be war. Many people will come to them in his name, claiming to be the Christ, and they aren't to believe him. And he's going to tell them later in the discourse how to recognize Christ, which will be important. Okay, cover the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. Will continue probably with the next 3.5 years next time. This is all part of our hope. It's also a part of God's justice and wrath on the world for the sin of the world that he's paying at this point. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.